Today, we uncover these people who got mauled by animals. From a vice principal who ignored every warning on an Australian crocodile tour just to lean over the rail for the perfect photo, to a flower farm manager who marched alone into the dark with a flare to personally chase off a herd of agitated hippos. It was March 22, 2016, and the humid air hung heavy over the Adelaide River floodplain, about an hour outside Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. The water moved slowly, brown and opaque, lined with paperbarks and pandanus palms that concealed the banks from easy view. Linda Hayes was a 38-year-old middle school vice principal from Melbourne who had built her professional reputation on enforcing rules for others while finding exceptions for herself. Colleagues described her as someone who demanded strict compliance from students and staff, but regularly bypassed protocols she found personally inconvenient. She had been written up twice by her superintendent for overstepping administrative boundaries, both times responding with grievances that dragged on for months. Her ex-husband later described her as someone who believed consequences applied to everyone but her. She had a history of arguing with flight attendants about seatbelt regulations and had once been removed from a guided tour in New Zealand for ignoring safety warnings about a glacier hike. Her vacation to the top end was meant to be a wildlife photography expedition, a hobby she approached with aggressive certainty. She had booked a river cruise advertised as a crocodile viewing experience, joining a group of 11 other tourists on an aluminum vessel designed for safe observation. The tour operator, a weathered local with over 20 years of experience on the river, delivered the mandatory safety briefing before departure. He explained that the Adelaide River system contained one of the highest concentrations of saltwater crocodiles in the world. He emphasized that passengers must remain seated and must never place hands or any body part near the water. Under no circumstances were passengers to approach the rails or lean over the edge. Linda responded with visible skepticism, questioning whether the warnings were legally required or simply theatrical. When the guide explained that multiple fatalities had occurred in territory waters, she dismissed the information as exaggerated local folklore designed to make the tour seem more exciting. Other passengers later recalled her rolling her eyes and muttering about overprotective guides who underestimated people's intelligence. She had researched crocodile attacks before the trip and believed she understood the risks better than a local boat operator. 20 minutes into the cruise, the boat stopped near a muddy bank where a large saltwater crocodile basked in the afternoon sun. The reptile measured approximately 14 feet and weighed an estimated 1,000 pounds. Its massive body stretched across the mud with jaws slightly agape. Passengers photographed from their seats while the guide provided information about crocodile biology, explaining that saltwater crocodiles were the largest living reptiles and could go months without eating. Linda complained to those near her that the angle was poor and the distance too great for quality photographs. She stood and moved to the stern, leaning over the low rail to get a shot without other passengers in her frame. The guide ordered her to sit down immediately. She ignored him completely, bracing one hand on the rail and extending her camera toward the water's surface. The crocodile on the bank had slipped into the water moments after the boat stopped, its movement so subtle that only the guide noticed. This behavior was typical. Crocodiles often entered the water when boats approached, positioning themselves for ambush beneath the surface, where their dark bodies blended with the muddy bottom. The guide began maneuvering the vessel away from the bank, but Linda remained at the stern, apparently unaware that the crocodile had disappeared. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles, with males commonly exceeding 16 feet and occasionally reaching over 20 feet in length. Large males can weigh well over 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of remaining motionless for hours while monitoring prey movement. Their bite is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, strong enough to crush bone instantly, and their hunting strategy typically involves explosive acceleration from the water, clamping onto prey and dragging it beneath the surface. The guide shouted a final warning, his voice carrying across the water. The crocodile struck from directly beneath the stern. The water erupted as the animal launched vertically, its jaws closing around Linda's right forearm and wrist with crushing force. The impact caused a severe fracture, bones splintering under pressure as the animal's weight pulled her toward the water. The interlocking teeth penetrated deep into muscle and tendon. Linda's scream was cut short as the crocodile's weight pulled her over the rail and into the water headfirst. She disappeared beneath the surface almost immediately, the turbid water closing over her within seconds. Other passengers later described seeing her camera fly into the air and land separately in the water several feet away. The water churned violently as the crocodile initiated its death roll, spinning through the murky water amid clouds of blood and sediment. The rolling continued for several seconds, the crocodile's jaws maintaining their crushing grip on her arm as the violent rotation disoriented her and prevented any attempt to surface. The death roll caused catastrophic damage to her shoulder and upper arm, tearing muscle and ligament while driving her deeper underwater. Her shoulder dislocated and then suffered complete structural failure as the rotational force exceeded the joint's natural limits. Her body surfaced briefly, face down and motionless, before being dragged under again as the crocodile repositioned its grip and pulled her toward deeper water. Witnesses reported seeing her limp form roll once more at the surface before vanishing entirely. The entire attack, from the initial strike to the final disappearance, lasted approximately 45 seconds. A search operation continued for 3 days, involving boat patrols, helicopter overflights, and crocodile trappers experienced in locating submerged remains. They set baited hooks and monitored known crocodile feeding areas. Linda's remains were located 4 days after the attack, cached beneath a submerged log system approximately 1 mile downstream from the attack site. The condition confirmed that the crocodile had fed extensively, with approximately a significant portion of tissue removed, consistent with the size of a 14 to 16-foot male over several days. The official cause of death was drowning, with massive blood loss from the injuries listed as a contributing factor. Following the attack, Northern Territory authorities launched an investigation into the tour operator's safety protocols. The operator was cleared of any liability, with investigators noting that Linda had received multiple direct warnings and had deliberately violated explicit safety instructions. The crocodile was not hunted or destroyed, as authorities determined it was acting on natural predatory instincts in its native habitat. The tour company implemented new policies requiring guides to physically block passengers who attempted to stand near rails, and all vessels were retrofitted with additional barriers. Linda's family filed a wrongful death claim against the tour operator, but it was dismissed based on the signed liability waiver and clear evidence of her deliberate noncompliance. It was September 18, 2014, and the last rays of equatorial sun were bleeding through the acacia trees at the edge of a safari lodge near Hoedspruit, Limpopo. Marieka Voslo stepped past the perimeter lanterns with a cigarette between her lips, about to discover that an apex predator doesn't distinguish between arrogance and ignorance when identifying prey. Marieke was a 42-year-old office administrator for a telecommunications firm in Pretoria. Her colleagues described her as confrontational and dismissive of workplace safety protocols, the type who removed hard hat requirements from her department's checklist because she found them inconvenient. At the lodge, she had quickly developed a reputation among staff and other guests, loudly complaining during the welcome briefing that the after-dark escort policy was ridiculous, that lions didn't come this close to lodges, and that the rangers were being overcautious to justify their salaries. She was a heavy smoker, going through nearly 2 packs daily, and had berated staff twice on her second day when they insisted someone accompany her outside the guest zone after sunset for her cigarette breaks. The morning safety briefing had been explicit. Guests were not to leave the designated lantern-lit zone after sunset. The head ranger, Peter Dutoit, had explained during lunch that fresh tracks indicated at least 2 male lions had been ranging along the eastern perimeter for the past 3 days. That afternoon, a lodge attendant named Thandi had directly warned Marieke after finding her smoking near the property edge during daylight, explaining that lions often use the same approach routes repeatedly, and that dusk was their most active hunting period. Marieke had responded by shouting that she hadn't paid this much money to be imprisoned. African lions are apex predators capable of taking down prey several times their body weight, with males weighing between 350 and 550 pounds. While lions are primarily nocturnal hunters, they remain active during twilight hours when failing light provides tactical advantage. Young adult males, recently expelled from their birth prides and not yet strong enough to challenge established males for territory, often range widely and hunt opportunistically, sometimes targeting easier prey than their usual quarry. At approximately 6:40 p.m., 20 minutes after sunset, Marieke walked out of her chalet carrying her cigarettes and lighter. 2 couples sitting on the main deck watched her stride purposefully toward the eastern edge of the lawn. One of them later told investigators he had assumed she was walking to the fire pit area, which was still within the safe zone. Instead, she continued past the last lantern post, stepping over the boundary into an area of knee-high grass and scattered thorn bush. The couples on the deck lost sight of her almost immediately as she moved into deeper shadow. Marika walked approximately 40 feet past the boundary, then crouched low near a dense acacia shrub, likely seeking shelter from the evening wind and flying insects while she smoked. The young adult male lion had been lying in a shallow depression, roughly 80 feet from the lodge perimeter for at least an hour, based on compressed vegetation later documented by wildlife officials. He was an estimated 4 years old, approximately 380 pounds, recently separated from his natal pride and ranging the area in search of food and territory. The failing light of dusk provided optimal hunting conditions, and human movement near the boundary had likely drawn his attention earlier in the evening. When Marieke moved into the open and then crouched in a posture that mimicked vulnerability, the lion began his approach. He moved through the scrub, using established game trails that kept him low and concealed, his tawny coat blending perfectly with the dry grass. Marieke remained crouched, facing away from his approach, her attention on lighting her cigarette. She never saw him coming. One of the tourists, still on the deck, caught movement in his peripheral vision and turned to see the lion already launching from the tall grass. The animal covered the final 8 feet in a single explosive bound, forepaws extended, claws deployed. The impact knocked Marieke forward and down with such force that witnesses heard the collision from 60 feet away. A heavy, meaty sound followed immediately by her scream. The lion's weight, roughly 380 pounds hitting at speed, drove her chest and face into the ground, compressing her ribcage. His forepaws pinned her shoulders, claws sinking deep into the muscle and flesh of her upper back, creating massive, tearing wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely through her shirt. Before she could draw breath to scream again, the lion's jaws clamped across the back of her head and her face simultaneously, the upper canines puncturing through the back of her skull. The bite exerted crushing pressure, fracturing bones. Her single scream cut off instantly. The lion began dragging her backward toward deeper cover, her body sliding limply through the dirt as he pulled, his jaws still locked on her head. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking into the ground and leaving a drag trail clearly visible in the dust. The lion pulled her approximately 15 feet into a thicker stand of thorn scrub, then released his grip and repositioned. The next bite targeted the back of her neck, his jaws closing around her cervical spine. The lion shook his head violently, the motion whipping her body back and forth like a rag doll, her arms flopping loosely. He bit again, higher on the neck, then again on her upper back. The low, rumbling growl of the feeding lion continued for another 20 seconds before the animal paused, apparently sensing the commotion from the lodge. One of the guests had been screaming for help from the moment of impact. The lodge attendant heard him and immediately radioed the ranger station while running toward the main office. The lodge manager, who was armed with a shotgun per protocol, grabbed the weapon and sprinted toward the eastern perimeter, but stopped at the boundary, lacking a clear line of fire in the darkness, and aware that guests were nearby. Unable to see the victim or the lion clearly, and unwilling to risk provoking an attack in low visibility, Peter, the head ranger, was already on duty nearby conducting evening perimeter checks at the staff quarters 400 yards away when the call came through. He arrived in a Toyota Land Cruiser equipped with a spotlight 7 minutes after the initial attack. He immediately spotted the lion crouched over Marieke's body in the scrub. Peter fired 2 warning shots from his rifle. The lion released the body and retreated rapidly into deeper bush, disappearing within seconds. Peter approached on foot with his rifle raised, accompanied by another armed ranger who had arrived moments after. They found Marieke lying face down in the thorn bush. Massive trauma was immediately visible. Her face and jaw were largely destroyed, with deep puncture wounds through her skull, and her neck showed severe cervical disruption with exposed vertebrae and destroyed musculature. Peter declared her dead at the scene. The coroner's report, issued 3 days later, listed the cause of death as massive cranial and spinal trauma resulting from African lion attack. The Safari Lodge suspended all guest activities immediately and closed for 2 nights, while wildlife officials conducted an investigation and tracked the lion. The animal was located the following morning and was not destroyed, as officials determined his behavior was a natural predatory response. Marieke's body was transported to Pretoria, where her ex-husband arranged cremation. It was April 22, 2015, the afternoon sun blazing over Lake Nicaragua's southern shore, when Isolde Vaughn waded into the water. The lake stretched vast and deceptively calm, a glassy surface reflecting the sun, its depths hiding a predator that most people assumed belonged only to the ocean. Isolde was a 39-year-old restaurant supervisor from Leon, managing a popular seafood establishment known for its strict standards and efficient service. Her co-workers described her as confident to the point of stubbornness, someone who made decisions quickly and rarely second-guessed herself. Her ex-husband had often complained that she never listened to anyone's concerns, dismissing worries as unnecessary drama. That Sunday, Isolde had driven her 2 children to Lake Nicaragua for a family outing. She chose a public access point popular with locals. Isolde had visited this same beach twice before without incident. Lake Nicaragua is one of the only freshwater bodies in the world that hosts bull sharks. These adaptable predators, capable of growing up to 10 feet long and weighing over 450 pounds, possess specialized kidneys that allow them to regulate salt retention, enabling them to thrive in both ocean and freshwater environments. Bull sharks are considered among the most dangerous shark species due to their aggressive reputation and tendency to inhabit shallow waters where humans swim. They are ambush predators, patient and opportunistic, capable of explosive strikes from nearly unseen positions beneath murky water. The afternoon had started pleasantly enough. Isolde spread a blanket on the sand while her children played at the water's edge, splashing in the shallows. Several fishermen worked nearby, mending nets and preparing lines. When Isolde announced her intention to swim out to cool off, one of the older fishermen called out a warning. He gestured toward the deeper water, shaking his head firmly and pointing to a faded sign posted near the beach that cautioned swimmers about dangerous wildlife. Isolde, visibly irritated, argued people swam here all the time and pointed to the calm water as proof. The fisherman persisted, warning of a large shark seen near the boats, and another joined in, gesturing urgently. Annoyed, Isolde told her children she'd be right back and waded into the lake, ignoring their cries as the water reached mid-thigh. She had been in the water for less than 2 minutes when the attack occurred. The bull shark struck from her left side with tremendous force, delivering a single, sudden bite to her hip and upper thigh, slamming into her and knocking her sideways. The impact alone was enough to cause severe blunt trauma. The shark's jaws closed around the upper leg and pelvic area, the serrated teeth designed for gripping and tearing rather than clean cuts. Isolde screamed, a sound the fishermen would later describe as something they'd never forget. The shark delivered a powerful lateral thrash, using its body mass to inflict catastrophic vascular injury. The water around her turned dark almost instantly, blood dispersing rapidly through the disturbed shallows. The shark released her after the initial strike and disappeared beneath the surface. Isolde, in shock and suffering massive arterial bleeding, turned toward shore. Her children's screams joined with the shouts of fishermen who were now scanning the water before rushing forward. The wound to her upper leg and lower torso was devastating, a massive open injury that resulted in uncontrolled blood loss. Isolde managed only a few unsteady steps toward shore before her legs gave out. She fell forward into the knee-deep water, her arms flailing weakly. The fishermen reached her within seconds, 2 men grabbing her under the arms and dragging her toward the beach. Her body left a streak of red across the sand as they pulled her above the waterline. Within several minutes of the attack, Isolde lost consciousness from blood loss, caused by rupture of a major blood vessel. Her skin had turned gray, her breathing shallow and irregular. One of the fishermen ran to a nearby shop to call for an ambulance, while others formed a barrier to prevent the traumatized children from getting closer to their dying mother. The ambulance arrived over 20 minutes after the emergency call, navigating the rough access road to the beach. Paramedics found Isolde unconscious with no detectable pulse. They attempted resuscitation during transport to the nearest clinic, but she was pronounced dead within minutes of arrival. The attending physician noted massive blood loss consistent with femoral artery rupture, severe soft tissue destruction, and internal injuries consistent with a large predatory animal attack. Authorities temporarily closed the beach. The fishermen's warnings were recorded in police reports detailing Isolde's refusal to heed multiple cautions. Her children went to relatives in Leon. The shark was never found, though crews remained cautious for weeks. It was October 9, 2016, and the morning mist still clung to the shoreline of Lake Victoria near Kisumu, Kenya, where the water met tall papyrus reeds in a maze of channels and mudflats. The lake stretched to the horizon, deceptively calm, its surface broken occasionally by the rounded backs of hippopotamuses moving between deeper water and the shallows. Brenda Luckman was a 52-year-old real estate agent from Phoenix, Arizona, who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of getting what she wanted through sheer persistence and volume. Her adult children had declined to join her on this trip, citing previous travel experiences that had devolved into public arguments with hotel staff and tour guides. One of her daughters later told investigators that Brenda had a pattern of ignoring rules she considered inconvenient, believing her experience and judgment outweighed any posted warning. Brenda had described the trip to friends as a bucket list adventure, though she had done minimal research and arrived with expectations shaped primarily by documentary footage and resort brochures. The lakeside camp where she was staying had clear protocols regarding wildlife interaction. A printed notice in each tent warned guests that hippos regularly moved through the camp at night, and that guests should never approach the water's edge alone. The camp manager, a Kenyan woman named Grace, personally briefed Brenda on the first evening, explaining that hippos are responsible for a huge number of fatal encounters across Africa and are notoriously territorial. Brenda listened with visible impatience, interrupting twice to ask when breakfast would be served. On her second morning, Brenda woke before dawn and decided to photograph the sunrise over the lake. She ignored the protocol requiring guests to request an escort and walked alone toward the shoreline. When a groundskeeper spotted her and called out a warning, she waved dismissively and continued walking. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for hundreds of human deaths in some estimates. Despite their rotund appearance, they are remarkably fast and agile, capable of running at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour on land and moving through water with powerful efficiency. Adult males can weigh over 4,000 pounds, and their jaws can open to nearly 180 degrees, revealing canine teeth that can exceed 16 inches in length. These teeth are not designed for eating. Hippos are herbivores, but for combat, and they can sever limbs, crush skulls, and inflict fatal wounds with a single bite. Hippos are highly territorial in water and perceive any intrusion as a threat. Brenda had waded approximately 15 feet from shore when the water in front of her suddenly bulged upward. A massive bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, water cascading off its barrel-shaped body as it lunged toward her. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, the pink interior and yellowed tusks clearly visible. Brenda stumbled backward, but lost her footing in the soft mud. She fell onto her back in the shallows as the hippo closed the distance. The animal's jaws slammed shut around Brenda's midsection, the lower tusks punching through her back, while the upper teeth crushed into her chest and abdomen. The bite force compressed her torso catastrophically, fracturing her spine and shattering multiple ribs. The hippo shook its massive head violently from side to side, the motion tearing through internal organs and opening massive wounds. Blood erupted from Brenda's mouth as her lungs collapsed under the crushing pressure. The hippo released its grip and immediately lunged forward again, driving its enormous weight down onto Brenda's body. The impact forced her underwater as over 2 tons of muscle and bone crushed her into the muddy lake bottom. The animal's tusks gored into her left thigh and hip during the assault, tearing through the femoral artery in a spray of blood that clouded the shallow water red. The hippo charged forward once more, trampling Brenda's motionless form as it moved into deeper water. Groundskeepers who had run toward the shoreline watched helplessly as the massive animal withdrew. Brenda's body was recovered approximately 2 hours later. Her injuries were so extensive that identification required documentation from her passport. The cause of death was determined to be massive hemorrhage and traumatic asphyxiation, secondary to crushing bite injuries and trampling. The camp reinforced its escort protocols and installed additional fencing near the waterline. It was August 22, 2016, and the suffocating Florida heat had already claimed 2 lives that summer in Broward County, but Brenda Holloway was about to become the 3rd casualty of a different kind of predator. Brenda Holloway, 62, had spent 37 years processing insurance claims before retiring to become the self-appointed guardian of homeowner association regulations. Brenda had earned her reputation through consistent enforcement of community standards. She carried a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws in her purse and had personally issued multiple violation notices in her 3 years of retirement. That Tuesday afternoon, Brenda had spotted a 15-year-old feeding ducks near the retention pond with a bag of bread. Witnesses said she marched across the perfectly maintained lawn, The teen had been visiting his grandmother in the community and was unaware of the feeding restrictions that Brenda enforced. When she confiscated his bread bag and began lecturing him about creating dependencies in wildlife, several residents emerged from their air-conditioned homes to watch the familiar scene unfold. The retention pond stretched across 2 acres of the community's center, its murky green surface disguising the ecosystem beneath. American alligators are perfectly adapted ambush predators, capable of remaining motionless for hours. Adults can reach lengths of 10 to 11 feet, still capable of lethal force. Once they secure prey, their instinct is to perform death rolls that disorient victims while tearing flesh and breaking bones. Likely determined to make her point about feeding restrictions, Brenda strode directly to the pond's edge with the confiscated bread bag. The water appeared calm, obscuring any movement beneath. Witnesses said she positioned herself on the concrete retaining wall, leaning forward to dispose of the bread by throwing it into the center of the pond, rather than near the shore where animals could access it. The attack came without warning as Brenda extended her arm over the water. An alligator surged forward from a shallow submerged shelf just below the retaining wall, its jaws clamping around her right forearm with devastating force. The impact knocked her off balance as the reptile's weight, later estimated by wildlife officers as consistent with an 11-foot animal, dragged her into the murky water. Her screams echoed across the community as the alligator submerged her almost immediately, initiating violent rolling movements consistent with predatory restraint behavior. Witnesses watched in horror as Brenda disappeared beneath the surface, the water churning violently around the thrashing forms. She resurfaced only for a matter of seconds, gasping and flailing with her left arm, blood spreading rapidly from catastrophic injuries to her right limb. The alligator maintained its grip, rolling again in short, forceful rotations that stripped tissue and fractured bone. Her desperate attempts to reach the concrete edge were futile against the reptile's overwhelming strength. She was pulled under again almost immediately, and the struggle ended. The entire attack lasted well under 2 minutes. The teenager ran to the nearest house and called 911. Deputies arrived within 12 minutes, followed by wildlife officers who brought specialized equipment for water recovery operations. The alligator had disappeared into the pond's depths with Brenda's body, forcing officers to wait until evening, when the reptile was more likely to surface. Brenda's remains were recovered at 7:30 p.m. after wildlife officers located and euthanized an alligator believed to be responsible for the attack. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive trauma and drowning. Tissue analysis confirmed that repeated feeding activity had habituated local alligators to human presence. The Palms at Cypress Creek installed reinforced fencing and restricted access barriers averaging 6 feet in height around the pond perimeter, and posted multiple warning signs in English and Spanish. Later safety reviews noted that years of residents feeding wildlife had created the dangerous conditions that led to Brenda's death, though no formal admission of liability was ever made public. It was September 14th, 2015, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The dry winter air carried the scent of dust and acacia as a safari vehicle idled on a dirt track, its passengers watching a pride of lions resting beneath a cluster of umbrella thorns some distance ahead. Karen Morrison was a 42-year-old insurance claim supervisor from San Diego, California, whose coworkers had long described her as someone who treated every interaction as a negotiation she intended to win. She had spent 23 years in the same office, gradually ascending to a position where she could delegate unpleasant tasks and challenge decisions made above her pay grade. Former colleagues said she had a habit of escalating minor disagreements into formal complaints and had once threatened legal action against a coffee shop over a loyalty card dispute. Her vacation to South Africa was meant to celebrate her recent divorce settlement, a trip she had planned meticulously while demanding upgrades and substitutions at every opportunity. Fellow guests at the lodge had already witnessed 2 confrontations before the safari departed that afternoon. During the morning safety briefing, the head guide, a seasoned ranger named Willem, emphasized that guests must remain inside the vehicle at all times. He explained that lions viewed humans outside vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appeared to be when seated. Karen interrupted twice, once to complain about departure time, and again to question why they couldn't get closer than what Willem described as safe distances. The vehicle had stopped at an appropriate distance from the pride, and guests were quietly photographing when Karen began expressing displeasure. She complained loudly that the animals were too far for decent photographs, and that she hadn't paid premium rates to squint at shapes in the distance. Willem reminded her calmly that approaching closer would endanger the group. Karen called him overcautious and suggested he was padding tour time to avoid actual work. Other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. As guests photographed, a lioness separated from the pride and moved into tall grass to the vehicle's right. Willem noticed and quietly instructed everyone to remain absolutely still. The lioness was hunting something, possibly a warthog in the brush, and her path would bring her within a few dozen yards of the vehicle. Karen seized the moment to stand, raising her camera above the metal frame to get an unobstructed shot. Willem ordered her to sit immediately. She waved him off without looking back. African lions are apex predators, with females weighing between 265 and 395 pounds, and males exceeding 420 pounds. Lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, capable of short bursts of speed that can close distance in seconds and coordinated takedowns of prey several times their size. Their killing method typically involves suffocation, clamping powerful jaws around the throat or muzzle to collapse the windpipe or cut off blood flow to the brain. Lions view humans outside vehicles as potential prey, their predatory instincts triggered by movement and vulnerability. The lioness's head snapped toward the movement. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then she began moving toward the vehicle, her body low, shoulder blades rolling beneath tawny fur. As Karen continued to stand, the lioness veered sharply, adjusting her approach toward the disturbance. Willem started the engine, but Karen remained standing, apparently believing she was getting exceptional footage. When the lioness broke into a sprint, covering the distance with terrifying speed, Willem shouted for everyone to hold on and attempted to reverse. Karen lost her balance as the vehicle lurched. She tumbled over the side rail, landing hard on packed dirt just a few feet from the vehicle. The lioness struck immediately. Her jaws clamped over Karen's neck and lower face, compressing her airway and major neck vessels. Her full weight pinned Karen to the ground. Karen's hands came up reflexively, pushing at the lioness's muzzle, but her strength faded within seconds as her airway collapsed. Her legs kicked briefly, then went still. The lioness maintained her grip, holding her for well over a minute as her body twitched and then went completely limp. Karen's hands came up reflexively, pushing at the lioness's muzzle, but her strength faded within seconds as her airway collapsed. Her legs kicked briefly, then went still. The lioness briefly applied additional pressure, ensuring the kill was complete. Only when Willem revved the engine and drove the vehicle directly toward her, shouting and honking aggressively, did the lioness release her grip. The disturbance caused her to retreat into the tall grass, abandoning the body. Emergency responders reached the site within minutes. Karen was found with catastrophic injuries to her neck and upper body. Officials determined the cause of death to be suffocation and massive blood loss caused by the lion's bite. The reserve concluded that safety protocols had been followed by staff, and that Karen's decision to stand and ignore direct instructions had precipitated the encounter. The lioness was not destroyed, as her behavior was deemed a natural predatory response. Fellow guests who witnessed the attack were offered counseling, and several cut their trips short. It was August 4th, 2014. And the late afternoon sun hung heavy over the Everglades National Park, casting long shadows across the murky canal water where Tamsin Crowell stood at the edge of the observation pull-off. Birds flitted between mangroves, and the occasional splash hinted at unseen movement below the dark surface. Tamsin was a 36-year-old real estate office manager from Tampa, known among her colleagues for her sharp tongue and an unwavering conviction that rules applied to other people. Her sister later described her as someone who always needed to be right, who would argue a point long past the time everyone else had moved on. She had taken this week off to vacation with extended family at a rental property near the park. Her vacation, she insisted, was meant to combine relaxation with authentic wildlife photography, and friends said that she carried herself with the confidence of someone certain she could charm, negotiate, or control any situation. That afternoon, she had insisted on stopping at this particular canal overlook, despite her brother-in-law's repeated suggestion that they move along to one of the designated viewing areas clearly marked for wildlife observation. She carried a bag of marshmallows she had purchased earlier that day from a roadside shop, explaining to her niece that they were specifically meant to help attract animals closer for better photographs. She spoke casually about how the white color would stand out against the dark water and vegetation, making it easier to draw attention from whatever might be lurking below the surface. What Tamsin likely didn't understand was the prehistoric predator that dominated these waters. American alligators can grow up to 15 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with males in this region averaging 11 to 12 feet. Their bite force measures approximately 2,980 pounds per square inch, among the most powerful of any animal on Earth. They are ambush predators, capable of explosive acceleration from nearly complete stillness, with stealth and patience honed over millennia. Specialized sensory organs along their jaws can detect minute vibrations in the water, enabling them to pinpoint struggling prey even in low visibility. Even the faintest ripple can trigger predatory instincts. Posted warnings explained that feeding alligators was not only illegal, but created a direct threat to human safety. Tamsin had read these aloud in a mocking voice to her family members before opening the bag of marshmallows. She began tossing them toward the water, each one landing with a soft plop. Several alligators that had been floating at a distance began moving closer. A tourist from the adjacent parking area approached and told Tamsin she needed to stop immediately. What followed was a loud argument, with Tamsin insisting she knew what she was doing and accusing the man of being paranoid. Her voice rose in pitch and volume as she threw another handful of marshmallows, this time directly at the nearest alligator. The splashing and shouting drew more attention from both tourists and wildlife. At least 4 large alligators had now closed in toward the bank, their bodies creating V-shaped wakes as they moved through the water with focused, deliberate motion. The attack happened so suddenly that several witnesses later struggled to describe the exact sequence. A massive alligator, later measured at just over 12 feet, lunged from the bank with explosive force. Its jaws clamped onto Tamsin's right forearm with an audible crack as bone shattered instantly beneath the pressure. Tamsin's scream tore across the waterway, raw and piercing. The alligator immediately initiated a death roll, a hunting technique where the predator rotates rapidly along its longitudinal axis to tear flesh and disorient prey. The violent twisting motion caused severe traumatic amputation, with near-complete avulsion of Tamsin's arm below the elbow, bone fragments exposed, and tissue torn in ragged strips. Witnesses described hearing wet tearing sounds and Tamsin screaming, reaching a pitch that several said they would never forget. The violent thrashing drew the other alligators toward the disturbance, competing for position in a rare scenario where multiple adult alligators engaged the same human simultaneously, a phenomenon noted by wildlife experts as extremely uncommon outside of deliberate feeding or provocation. Before anyone could react, the alligator dragged Tamsin into the canal. She went under briefly, then surfaced, her left arm flailing as she tried to grab onto the bank. A second alligator struck from her left side, its jaws closing around her ribcage. Tamsin's legs kicked violently above the water's surface for several seconds, her body jerking in different directions as more than one alligator maintained a grip during the struggle. The water churned violently, thick with sediment and blood. Witnesses could see Tamsin's body being pulled deeper, the thrashing growing weaker. Her head surfaced once more, her mouth open but producing no sound, before she went under again. The churning continued for nearly 20 seconds, then abruptly went still. Tamsin did not resurface. The entire attack, from initial strike to final submersion, a bystander had dialed 911 within seconds of the initial lunge. Park rangers arrived 14 minutes later, followed quickly by wildlife officers. The pull-off was immediately cleared and cordoned off as rangers separated witnesses and began collecting statements. Recovery divers located Tamsin's body nearly an hour later, approximately 200 yards downstream, a distance attributed to a slow current and the movement of multiple animals during the frenzied attack caught in submerged vegetation. The medical examiner's preliminary report indicated massive trauma to the right arm with severe traumatic amputation below the elbow, multiple rib fractures with puncture wounds consistent with alligator dentition, and drowning as the likely cause of death. The alligator responsible was trapped and euthanized within 24 hours. 3 other large alligators in the immediate area were also removed due to documented aggressive behavior toward the recovery team. Wildlife officials noted that the feeding behavior had clearly conditioned multiple animals to associate humans with food, creating an immediate danger that required removal rather than relocation. It was April 14, 2018, and the late afternoon light filtered through the coastal oaks along the closed section of Pine Ridge Trail in the Santa Lucia Range. Reina Calderon walked 30 yards behind her 2 children, unaware that her habit of letting them run unsupervised was about to be catastrophic. Rena was a 37-year-old real estate assistant who lived in Cambria. She had been hiking the trails for 8 years. Other hikers said that she prided herself on being no-nonsense, publicly calling out rangers and other hikers she labeled overcautious, and insisting she was experienced enough to make her own judgments about safety protocols. They said that her social media posts often mocked helicopter parents and encouraged others to flout posted rules, and she routinely allowed her children, ages 6 and 9, to run ahead on trails, sometimes disappearing around bends while she walked at her own pace. That Saturday, she had decided to take her 2 sons on what she described to her husband as a quick afternoon hike, despite the trail closure signs posted at the trailhead. She had parked at the Los Padres Day Use area and walked past the closure gate, which had been left partially open by previous trespassers. The trail closure notice specifically cited multiple mountain lion sightings within a quarter mile of the trail and advised hikers to avoid the area entirely until further notice. Mountain lions, also called cougars or pumas, are North America's second-largest cat species, with adults typically weighing between 90 and 160 pounds and measuring 6 to 8 feet from nose to tail. They are ambush predators with explosive power, capable of vertical leaps exceeding 15 feet and short burst sprints at very high speeds over limited distances. Their jaws are powerful enough to crush neck structures and inflict catastrophic trauma in a single bite, with canine teeth up to 2 inches long, designed to puncture vital structures in the neck and skull. Mountain lions typically avoid humans, but defensive attacks occur when they perceive threats to kills or kittens, or when surprised at close range. They are most dangerous during dusk and dawn hunting hours, and children running or moving erratically can trigger predatory or defensive responses. Wildlife officials universally recommend keeping children within arm's reach in mountain lion country and making noise to avoid surprise encounters. The section of trail Rena had chosen wound through dense scrub with walls of vegetation on both sides that limited sightlines to 15 or 20 feet in many places. The path curved frequently, following the natural contours of the hillside. At approximately 5:40 p.m., according to the witness statement of another hiker who had entered the closed trail from the opposite direction, Rena's 2 boys were running ahead, their voices carrying back through the still air. Rena's sons had rounded a blind curve approximately 40 yards ahead of their mother, when the younger boy ran directly past a mountain lion that had been either resting or feeding in the dense brush just off the trail. The animal was later determined to be an adult female, estimated at 110 pounds based on paw measurements. The lion reacted to the child's sudden proximity with a defensive strike, lunging from cover and tackling the 6-year-old boy from behind. The child's screams were immediate and high-pitched. His older brother began screaming as well and stumbled backward. One of the kids said that Rena came running around the curve within seconds. The witness, who was approximately 60 yards away on the opposite side of the curve, heard the sequence clearly: children's screams, an adult woman shouting, then a different quality of scream, deeper, more primal, followed by thrashing sounds in the undergrowth. He ran toward the sounds, pulling his phone from his pocket and immediately dialing 911. He reached the curve and saw the attack in progress, a tawny shape on top of a woman's body in the vegetation, the woman's legs kicking weakly, dark blood visible on the ground and spreading across the dirt trail. He shouted and waved his arms, his voice cracking. The 9-year-old boy was standing frozen on the trail, his face blank with shock. The younger boy was still on the ground, bleeding from lacerations to his scalp and back, crying in broken gasps. Rena later showed defensive wounds consistent with her charging directly at the lion while it was on top of her son. The lion released the child and pivoted toward the larger threat. Rena had covered perhaps 10 feet when the animal launched itself at her chest height, its trajectory explosive and precise. She had no time to raise her arms or turn away. The lion's front paws struck her upper chest and right shoulder, claws extending and puncturing through her cotton shirt into muscle and collarbone, the impact staggering her backward. Its jaws closed on her neck in a single fluid motion, inflicting catastrophic neck trauma with immediate vascular and airway compromise. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Massive hemorrhage began within seconds, rapidly soaking her shirt and the animal's muzzle. Rena's legs gave out almost instantly, her body collapsing as the animal's weight drove her sideways into the brush at the trail's edge. The older brother said that her hands came up reflexively, gripping the lion's fur, but her strength likely faded rapidly as blood pressure collapsed. The lion maintained its grip on Rena's neck for approximately 8 to 10 seconds according to the witness's estimate, though he acknowledged time felt distorted. The pressure completely occluded blood flow to her brain. Her kicking slowed, then stopped. Her hands fell away from the lion's body and dropped into the dirt. The lion released its bite and stepped back, its muzzle and chest fur matted with blood. It turned and bounded into the dense chaparral, disappearing within seconds. The witness ran to Rena first. She was lying on her side, her head at an unnatural angle, her neck showing extensive traumatic injury with massive blood loss. Blood had pooled beneath her head and soaked into the sandy soil, forming a dark, spreading stain. Her eyes were open but unseeing, and she was not breathing. The 911 dispatcher kept him on the line, instructing him to check for breathing and pulse while also assessing the injured child. Paramedics and wildlife officers arrived via the access road at approximately 6:07 p.m., 24 minutes after the call. They found Rena unresponsive, with catastrophic neck trauma and exsanguination. No resuscitation was attempted, given the obvious nature of her injuries, and time elapsed. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her 6-year-old son, whose name was withheld from public reports, had sustained deep lacerations to his scalp, neck, and upper back, with tissue trauma consistent with large carnivore bite and claw marks. He was airlifted to the hospital in critical condition. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination and catastrophic cerebral hypoxia due to bilateral carotid artery trauma from a mountain lion bite, with contributing airway compromise. The time of death was within approximately 1 minute of the initial attack. The 6-year-old boy died 3 days later from complications related to his injuries, including infection and traumatic shock. Wildlife officers tracked and killed the female mountain lion the following morning. Necropsy revealed she had 2 young kittens nearby, explaining the defensive nature of the attack. Rena's husband declined media interviews, and the family held a private memorial service attended only by close relatives. The older son, who witnessed the entire attack, was placed in counseling. No legal action was taken against any party, as the trail closure had been clearly posted, and the attack was determined to be a foreseeable consequence of human intrusion into closed wildlife habitat during a period of known mountain lion activity. It was July 28, 2017, and the morning sun filtered through lodgepole pines along a backcountry trail in Montana's Glacier National Park, where the air smelled of pine needles and distant snowmelt. The trail wound through prime grizzly habitat, dense timber interspersed with berry-rich clearings, and the Park Service had posted fresh warnings at every trailhead following multiple bear sightings in the preceding week. Karen Whitmore was a 47-year-old dental office manager from suburban Denver who had planned this hiking trip as a personal challenge, a way to prove to herself and others that she could handle wilderness conditions without what she called the excessive hand-holding promoted by government agencies. She had posted extensively on social media in the weeks before the trip, mocking national park regulations and insisting that bear danger was statistically negligible. She had purchased bear spray at a sporting goods store, but had never practiced using it. At the trailhead that morning, Karen encountered a park ranger conducting routine hiker contacts. The ranger informed her that a sow grizzly with 2 cubs had been sighted repeatedly along the trail she intended to hike and recommended she choose an alternate route or wait to join a larger group. Karen responded with hostility, accusing the ranger of trying to control where people could walk on public land. She set off alone, declining the offered bear safety pamphlet. The trail climbed steadily through timber before opening into a meadow thick with huckleberry bushes. Karen stopped multiple times to photograph wildflowers and distant peaks, apparently unconcerned about making noise or remaining alert. 2 separate hiking parties passed her going the opposite direction, both warning her about a fresh bear sign ahead. She thanked neither group and continued forward. Approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, the trail narrowed and curved around a dense thicket of willows bordering a small creek. Karen was moving quickly, eyes on her phone as she checked the GPS, when she rounded the curve and found herself less than 40 feet from a female grizzly and 2 yearling cubs. The sow was standing on her hind legs, testing the air, and the cubs were behind her in the brush. Karen froze. Grizzly bears in the northern Rockies typically weigh between 400 and 800 pounds, with females averaging toward the lower end of that range. Despite their bulk, they can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour and cover short distances faster than any human can react. Grizzlies are not typically predatory toward humans, but sows with cubs are extraordinarily defensive and account for the majority of fatal maulings in North America. The bear's claws, which can exceed 4 inches in length, while its bite force can crush bone and sever limbs. Defensive attacks are typically brief but catastrophic. The sow dropped to all fours and charged without a bluff display. Karen turned to run, the worst possible response, and managed perhaps 3 strides before the bear overtook her. The impact struck her from behind, the bear's weight driving her face first into the rocky trail. Karen's nose and several teeth were shattered on contact with the ground. Before she could rise, the sow was on top of her. The bear's front paw came down on Karen's upper back with crushing force, claws raking deep furrows from her shoulder blade to her spine. Karen screamed as the sow bit down on her left shoulder and upper arm, shaking violently before releasing. The bear struck again with her paw, this time catching Karen across the side of her head and face, the blow fracturing her cheekbone and jaw. The claws opened her scalp in several places, blood pouring down her face and neck. The sow repositioned and bit into Karen's upper back, jaws clamping down on muscle and bone with enough force to crack ribs. She shook her massive head, tearing tissue and opening wounds that immediately began bleeding heavily. The bear's weight pressed down on Karen's torso, compressing her chest and making it nearly impossible to breathe. Karen's attempts to protect herself grew weaker as shock and blood loss took hold. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but inflicted catastrophic damage. The sow delivered multiple crushing bites to Karen's back and shoulders, while her claws tore through clothing and flesh across Karen's ribcage, arms, and the back of her head. When Karen's body went limp and her screaming stopped, the sow stepped back, huffing loudly. She stood over Karen briefly, then moved away toward her cubs and disappeared into the timber. A hiking party found her later that morning. They initially attempted to check for signs of life, but retreated when they noticed fresh bear scat nearby. Rangers reached the area using a helicopter. Karen was pronounced dead at the scene. Officials documented massive soft tissue destruction to the back, shoulders, and scalp, multiple rib fractures, severe facial trauma, and fatal blood loss consistent with a defensive grizzly bear mauling. The sow and cubs were not destroyed, as the attack was deemed a natural defensive response to sudden close contact. It was July 22, 2016, and the murky waters of the Daintree River held secrets that had claimed lives for millennia. Secrets that Carla Wenrick would discover in the most horrific way possible as the ancient predator beneath the surface prepared for an attack. Carla was a 41-year-old human resources consultant from Sydney, known throughout her mid-tier consulting firm for her aggressive personality and relentless complaints about what she perceived as inadequate service. Her colleagues privately described her as someone who treated every interaction as a battle to be won. Carla had built her reputation on never backing down from confrontation, whether berating restaurant servers or demanding refunds from hotels. This trip to Queensland represented Carla's first real vacation in 3 years, funded by a recent promotion. Her colleagues said that she had specifically chosen the Daintree River cruise after reading online reviews that promised close encounters with saltwater crocodiles. Her stated goal was to capture dramatic photos for her social media account, which she used primarily to document her travels and criticize businesses that failed to meet her expectations. The Daintree River wound through ancient rainforest, where saltwater crocodiles had ruled as apex predators. These massive reptiles can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh well over a ton, with a bite force exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Primarily ambush predators, saltwater crocodiles rely on stealth and positioning rather than pursuit, capable of explosive bursts of speed both in water and at the water's edge. The tour guide, Jamie, was a weathered local who had been running river cruises for 15 years without incident. That morning, he had specifically warned the 12 passengers about maintaining distance from the water and remaining seated at all times. He pointed out fresh slide marks on the muddy banks, evidence of large crocodiles moving between water and land, and explained that the river's murky water made it impossible to see submerged animals. Several passengers nodded seriously, but others noted Carla rolling her eyes and muttering audibly about overcautious tour guides. 20 minutes into the cruise, the guide said he spotted a massive saltwater crocodile floating near a fallen tree, its eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline. He estimated the animal at roughly 18 feet long, explaining to passengers that this was likely a territorial male. As the boat maintained a safe distance of about 50 yards, Carla became increasingly agitated, loudly complaining that they were too far away for good photos. She demanded that they move closer, dismissing the guide's explanations about safety protocols as gatekeeping wildlife. When other passengers began backing away from the railings as Jamie had instructed, Carla declared that crocodiles were lazy unless provoked. Despite repeated warnings, she stood up and moved to the boat's edge, leaning over the waist-high aluminum railing, her phone ready. Jamie immediately cut the engine and ordered Carla to sit down, stepping toward her and reaching for her arm, but she ignored him completely. Leaning farther over the railing, she began slapping the water's surface with her open palm, trying to provoke a reaction from the distant crocodile for her video. The other tourists watched in horror as she continued her aggressive behavior, some pleading with her to stop. Jamie restarted the engine in an attempt to back the boat away, but Carla had already drawn the attention of a predator that had silently repositioned beneath the surface, responding to vibration and disturbance. The attack came without warning. The crocodile had submerged and approached the boat underwater. In a single explosive movement, it surged upward from directly beneath where Carla leaned over the railing. The massive jaws, lined with over 60 conical teeth designed to grip and crush, clamped onto her lower torso. The force of the strike violently bent her body over the railing, pulling her center of mass toward the water. Witnesses later described hearing a loud cracking sound as the crocodile's jaws closed, consistent with severe skeletal trauma, later documented by the coroner. Blood spread rapidly across the water's surface as the predator initiated a death roll, a spinning maneuver used to disable and dismember prey. Based on the pattern of injuries, Carla's spine was believed to have fractured during the first rotation, her body twisting unnaturally as the crocodile's mass rolled through the water. Within seconds, she was dragged completely under, the churning water turning crimson as the crocodile continued its violent feeding behavior. Passengers watched in frozen horror as the water boiled with movement, occasional glimpses of the crocodile's massive tail breaking the surface. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, from initial strike to final submersion, as estimated by multiple witnesses. Jamie immediately radioed emergency services. Several passengers reported that Carla's phone disappeared beneath the surface during the initial strike, leaving no usable footage of the attack. Marine rescue units arrived approximately 20 minutes later, but there was nothing to be done except begin a search. The crocodile had disappeared into the river's depths, behavior consistent with retreating to a submerged cache site. Carla's body was recovered the following day, lodged against a submerged branch nearly half a mile downstream. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the torso and pelvis, with spiral fractures characteristic of rotational force, consistent with a crocodile death roll. Cause of death was listed as massive blood loss, with drowning as a contributing factor. The incident received only brief regional news coverage, with authorities emphasizing that the victim had ignored multiple safety warnings. The cruise operator implemented stricter physical enforcement of seating rules and clearer exclusion protocols, while Carla's family quietly deleted her social media accounts. It was June 5, 2018, and the morning sun filtered through lodgepole pines along a backcountry trail in Montana's Glacier National Park, where the air smelled of pine needles and distant snowmelt. The trail wound through prime grizzly habitat, dense timber interspersed with berry-rich clearings, and the Park Service had posted fresh warnings at every trailhead following multiple bear sightings in the preceding week. Patricia Clark was a 50-year-old dental office manager from suburban Denver who had planned this hiking trip as a personal challenge, a way to prove to herself and others that she could handle wilderness conditions without what she called the excessive hand-holding promoted by government agencies. She had posted extensively on social media in the weeks before the trip, mocking national park regulations and insisting that bear danger was statistically negligible. She had purchased bear spray at a sporting goods store, but had never practiced using it. At the trailhead that morning, Patricia encountered a park ranger conducting routine hiker contacts. The ranger informed her that a sow grizzly with 2 cubs had been sighted repeatedly along the trail she intended to hike and recommended she choose an alternate route or wait to join a larger group. Patricia responded with hostility, accusing the ranger of trying to control where people could walk on public land. She set off alone, declining the offered bear safety pamphlet. The trail climbed steadily through timber before opening into a meadow thick with huckleberry bushes. Patricia stopped multiple times to photograph wildflowers and distant peaks, apparently unconcerned about making noise or remaining alert. Two separate hiking parties passed her going the opposite direction, both warning her about a fresh bear sign ahead. She thanked neither group and continued forward. Approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, the trail narrowed and curved around a dense thicket of willows bordering a small creek. Patricia was moving quickly, eyes on her phone as she checked the GPS, when she rounded the curve and found herself less than 40 feet from a female grizzly and 2 yearling cubs. The sow was standing on her hind legs testing the air, and the cubs were behind her in the brush. Patricia froze. Grizzly bears in the northern Rockies typically weigh between 400 and 800 pounds, with females averaging toward the lower end of that range. Despite their bulk, they can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour and cover short distances faster than any human can react. Grizzlies are not typically predatory toward humans, but sows with cubs are extraordinarily defensive and account for the majority of fatal maulings in North America. The sow dropped to all fours and charged without a bluff display. Patricia turned to run, the worst possible response, and managed perhaps 3 strides before the bear overtook her. The impact struck her from behind, the bear's weight driving her face first into the rocky trail. Patricia's nose and several teeth were shattered on contact with the ground. Before she could rise, the sow was on top of her. The bear's front paw came down on Patricia's upper back with crushing force, claws raking deep furrows from her shoulder blade to her spine. Patricia screamed as the sow bit down on her left shoulder and upper arm, shaking violently before releasing. The bear struck again with her paw, this time catching Patricia across the side of her head and face. The blow fractured her cheekbone and jaw. The claws opened her scalp in several places, blood pouring down her face and neck. The sow repositioned and bit into Patricia's upper back, jaws clamping down on muscle and bone with enough force to crack ribs. She shook her massive head, tearing tissue and opening wounds that immediately began bleeding heavily. The bear's weight pressed down on Patricia's torso, compressing her chest and making it nearly impossible to breathe. Patricia's attempts to protect herself grew weaker as shock and blood loss took hold. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds but inflicted catastrophic damage. The sow delivered multiple crushing bites to Patricia's back and shoulders, while her claws tore through clothing and flesh across Patricia's ribcage, arms, and the back of her head. When Patricia's body went limp and her screaming stopped, the sow stepped back, huffing loudly. She stood over Patricia briefly, then moved away toward her cubs and disappeared into the timber. A hiking party found her later that morning. They initially attempted to check for signs of life, but retreated when they noticed fresh bear scat nearby. Rangers reached the area using a helicopter. Patricia was pronounced dead at the scene. Officials documented massive soft tissue destruction to the back, shoulders, and scalp, multiple rib fractures, severe facial trauma, and fatal blood loss consistent with a defensive grizzly bear mauling. The sow and cubs were not destroyed, as the attack was deemed a natural defensive response to sudden close contact. It was February 3, 2018, and the dry season had turned the forest fringe of Ranthambore into a maze of brittle undergrowth and sun-bleached earth. Kavira Sondi stepped off the marked trail, her irritation from earlier still simmering as she pushed deeper into the brush. Kavira was a 44-year-old wellness retreat coordinator from Jaipur, known among her circles for her particular brand of spirituality that emphasized personal space and communion with nature. Her reputation was solid, if somewhat abrasive. Former clients often mentioned her expertise, but also her impatience with those who didn't take the practice seriously. Friends recalled her journal entries, filled with plans for solitary meditations and notes on finding clarity in isolation. She had driven to Ranthambore alone that weekend, seeking what she described in her journal as an authentic wilderness experience. That morning, she had started on the designated nature trail with a handful of other hikers, but within 20 minutes had snapped at a young couple for walking too close behind her and disrupting her focus. When an older hiker politely suggested the group maintain visual contact for safety, Kavira had dismissed the concern with visible annoyance. People recalled her muttering about crowds and chatter interrupting her connection with the forest. She mentioned wanting to find a private spot away from the main path, somewhere she could meditate without the constant chatter and camera clicks of tourists. The forest fringe of Ranthambore is not the tourist-friendly tiger reserve most visitors experience. It's a transitional zone where dense forest meets scrubland, creating perfect habitat for one of India's most dangerous animals, the sloth bear. Despite their misleading name, sloth bears are aggressive omnivores weighing roughly 200 to 300 pounds, equipped with curved claws reaching nearly 3 inches long, evolved for tearing open termite mounds. Unlike other bear species, sloth bears have poor eyesight and startle easily, making them the most dangerous when cornered or surprised, and their sudden, explosive charges leave little time for reaction. Local guides had reported increased sloth bear activity in the area due to recent Forest Department honey collection that had disturbed several dens. Kavira had presented her ID and safari permit at the buffer checkpoint but had not stayed with the group, and people said she had barely glanced at the warning board, more focused on escaping the crowd than on the explicit dangers outlined there. The board had bright yellow warnings with bold lettering and diagrams of a bear's strike zone, clearly visible even from 10 feet away. Around mid-morning, she veered from the trail into denser brush. Another hiker, a man who had been maintaining distance after her earlier outburst, noticed her departure and called out a warning. When she didn't respond, he followed at approximately 40 feet, concerned but unwilling to provoke another confrontation. He hesitated at the edge, about to turn back when he decided to make one more attempt to convince her to return to the trail. The sloth bear sow had been foraging with her 2 cubs in a small clearing screened by dense vegetation. At approximately 250 pounds with a distinctive cream-colored chest marking, she was in the most dangerous phase of motherhood. Cubs old enough to explore but still requiring fierce protection. Sloth bears have documented swift reaction times when startled, and their maternal aggression is responsible for more human fatalities in India than tiger attacks. Kavira stumbled directly into the clearing, less than 15 feet from where the cubs were investigating a rotted log. The man, still approaching through the brush, heard her sudden gasp. Forest staff routinely advise people to back away slowly and keep voices low. The sow charged instantly, covering the distance in a blur of dark fur and rage. The impact knocked Kavira flat on her back. The bear's first swipe caught her across the torso, the 3-inch claws ripping through her cotton shirt and into flesh with shocking ease. The wounds opened wide, 3 parallel gashes across her abdomen deep enough to expose underlying tissue and muscle. Kavira screamed, a sound the man described as more surprise than pain initially, her hands coming up defensively as the bear's weight pressed down on her. The second strike tore across her chest and left shoulder, the claws catching on bone. The force of the blow jerked her body sideways even as the bear held her down. The bear focused on Kavira's head and face, typical sloth bear behavior, her jaws closing on Kavira's skull with audible force. The man saw Kavira's body convulse once, then go still. The sow delivered 2 more savage bites to Kavira's face and neck before suddenly retreating, gathering her cubs with urgent vocalizations and crashing away through the undergrowth. The entire encounter had taken less than a minute. The man ran, stumbling and falling twice in his panic to reach the trailhead. Rangers responded to his frantic report, arriving at the scene 22 minutes later from a nearby ranger post. They found Kavira where she had fallen, her body ravaged beyond any hope of survival. She was declared dead on scene. The slashes across her torso had caused massive hemorrhaging, while severe trauma to her skull and face had likely caused near-immediate unconsciousness. A preliminary post-mortem by the local district medical examiner documented severe lacerations to the abdomen measuring 8 to 12 inches in length and up to 3 inches deep, extensive facial mutilation, and severe cranial and cervical trauma consistent with a large animal attack. The sloth bear and her cubs were not tracked. Forest officials closed that section of trail permanently and increased warning signage throughout the reserve. Kavira's body was returned to her family in Jaipur. It was May 3, 2017, and the African sun hung mercilessly over a private reserve, casting harsh shadows across the savannah, where a woman would draw her final breath beneath a predator's crushing jaws. Madison McCrae was a 27-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona, a retail worker, known among her co-workers for demanding manager attention over trivial issues and loudly insisting on better service. People said she had cultivated a sense of entitlement that extended to every aspect of her life. She had scraped together savings from part-time work to fund a South African safari, her first trip outside the United States. But she likely saw it less as a chance to explore wildlife and more as an opportunity to enforce her expectations on the world and to capture dramatic content for Instagram. Madison had booked the cheapest safari package available, yet the private reserve said she constantly complained that the accommodations and itinerary weren't up to standard. She frequently demanded exceptions from guides, snapping at them when things didn't match the experience she believed she was owed. Their guide had already spotted a pride of lions resting near a seasonal watering hole, the massive male lying in the shade of a marula tree within established stalking distance, estimated at 80 to 100 yards from the vehicle. African lions are apex predators capable of reaching speeds of up to 40 miles per hour in short bursts, with males weighing up to 420 pounds and possessing jaws strong enough to collapse a large ungulate's windpipe within seconds. The guide had emphasized multiple times that morning that guests must remain in their vehicles at all times, explaining that lions view humans outside of vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appear to be when seated in safari trucks. Madison had listened to the safety briefing while scrolling through her phone, occasionally asking when they would get closer to the animals for better photos. The vehicle was stationary with the engine idling, positioned on open ground with no fencing or barriers. Guests remained seated, as required, while Johan momentarily turned his attention to a radio call. Madison immediately began complaining about the distance to the lions, arguing that her photos would be worthless from so far away. Other tourists were visibly uncomfortable as the guide tried to calm her down. She had noticed the male lion lying motionless and misinterpreted his stillness as deep sleep. Without permission and in direct violation of protocol, Madison stepped down from the vehicle, clutching her camera. Relying on proximity and her sudden movement alone, she moved several yards away from the truck, closing the distance further while the lion remained low and facing her. The male lion's response was immediate and terrifying. His head snapped up, locking onto Madison as she raised her camera well within the animal's ambush zone. Lions are ambush predators, and this male had already been positioned to stalk from close range. He rose to his feet with fluid, controlled power as Madison finally grasped the scale of her error. She turned to run, but witnesses said her boots slipped on loose gravel as the lion lunged forward. The lion covered the distance in seconds, his forepaws slamming into Madison's upper back and driving her face first into the ground. The lion clamped his jaws around Madison's throat, causing rapid incapacitation, followed by loss of consciousness. The pressure of the bite and the force of her fall caused catastrophic cervical trauma. Blood spread rapidly beneath her as the lion maintained his hold until her body went slack. The lion then seized Madison by the shoulder and dragged her toward a dense cluster of thorn bushes, a common behavior intended to secure a kill away from perceived threats and scavengers. The remaining guests watched in paralyzed silence as the lion stood over the body, his posture rigid and alert. The guide radioed park control immediately, his voice controlled as he reported a probable wildlife fatality and requested armed assistance. Armed rangers arrived approximately 14 minutes later. The lion was driven off using vehicles and warning shots, retreating into the brush before the team approached. Madison was pronounced dead at the scene. Her body was later transported for formal examination, which determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to tracheal collapse and massive vascular injury to the neck, with contributing blunt force trauma from the initial takedown. The reserve conducted a comprehensive review of its safety procedures. Investigators concluded that existing protocols had been followed and that Madison's decision to exit the vehicle and provoke the animal directly led to the fatal encounter. The death was ruled accidental. The lion was not euthanized, with authorities determining that the animal had behaved in accordance with natural instincts. It was June 17, 2015. And the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The dry winter air carried the scent of dust and acacia as a safari vehicle idled on a dirt track, its passengers watching a pride of lions resting beneath a cluster of umbrella thorns some distance ahead. Diane Relford was a 49-year-old insurance claims supervisor from San Diego, California, whose co-workers had long described her as someone who treated every interaction as a negotiation she intended to win. She had spent 23 years in the same office, gradually ascending to a position where she could delegate unpleasant tasks and challenge decisions made above her pay grade. Former colleagues said she had a habit of escalating minor disagreements into formal complaints and had once threatened legal action against a coffee shop over a loyalty card dispute. Her vacation to South Africa was meant to celebrate her recent divorce settlement, a trip she had planned meticulously while demanding upgrades and substitutions at every opportunity. Fellow guests at the lodge had already witnessed 2 confrontations before the safari departed that afternoon. During the morning safety briefing, the head guide, a seasoned ranger named Willem, emphasized that guests must remain inside the vehicle at all times. He explained that lions viewed humans outside vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appeared to be when seated. Diane interrupted twice, once to complain about departure time, and again to question why they couldn't get closer than what Willem described as safe distances. The vehicle had stopped at an appropriate distance from the Pride, and guests were quietly photographing when Diane began expressing displeasure. She complained loudly that the animals were too far for decent photographs and that she hadn't paid premium rates to squint at shapes in the distance. Willem reminded her calmly that approaching closer would endanger the group. Diane called him overcautious and suggested he was padding tour time to avoid actual work. Other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. African lions are apex predators, with females weighing between 265 and 395 pounds, and males exceeding 420 pounds. Lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, capable of short bursts of speed that can close distance in seconds and coordinated takedowns of prey several times their size. Their killing method typically involves suffocation, clamping powerful jaws around the throat or muzzle to collapse the windpipe or cut off blood flow to the brain. Lions view humans outside vehicles as potential prey, their predatory instincts triggered by movement and vulnerability. A lion's claws can exceed 3 inches in length, and their jaws are powerful enough to crush and tear with minimal effort. As guests photographed, a lioness separated from the pride and moved into tall grass to the vehicle's right. Willem noticed and quietly instructed everyone to remain absolutely still. The lioness was hunting something, possibly a warthog in the brush, and her path would bring her within a few dozen yards of the vehicle. Diane seized the moment to stand, raising her camera above the metal frame to get an unobstructed shot. Willem ordered her to sit immediately. She waved him off without looking back. The lioness's head snapped toward the movement. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then she began moving toward the vehicle, her body low, shoulder blades rolling beneath tawny fur. Willem started the engine, but Diane remained standing, apparently believing she was getting exceptional footage. When the lioness broke into a sprint, covering the distance with terrifying speed, Willem shouted for everyone to hold on and attempted to reverse. Diane lost her balance as the vehicle lurched. She tumbled over the side rail, landing hard on packed dirt just a few feet from the vehicle. The lioness adjusted her trajectory instantly. Before Diane could rise, the animal was on her. The lioness struck Diane's upper body with her full weight, driving her onto her back. Jaws clamped around Diane's throat, crushing her windpipe and pinning her to the ground. Diane's hands came up reflexively, pushing at the lioness's muzzle, but her strength faded within seconds as her airway collapsed. Her legs kicked briefly, then went still. The lioness maintained her suffocating grip, holding Diane's throat for well over a minute as her body twitched and then went completely limp. Even after Diane's movements ceased, the lioness briefly applied pressure, ensuring the kill was complete. Only when Willem revved the engine and drove the vehicle directly toward her, shouting and honking aggressively, did the lioness release her grip. The disturbance caused her to retreat into the tall grass, abandoning the body. Emergency responders reached the site within minutes. Diane was found with catastrophic injuries to her neck and upper body. Officials determined the cause of death to be suffocation and massive blood loss caused by the lion's bite. The reserve concluded that safety protocols had been followed by staff, and that Diane's decision to stand and ignore direct instructions had precipitated the encounter. The lioness was not destroyed, as her behavior was deemed a natural predatory response. Fellow guests who witnessed the attack were offered counseling, and several cut their trips short. It was July 3rd, 2016, and the first light of an Alaskan summer morning was just breaking over the unregulated campground 12 miles east of the Denali Highway, where Colleen Hartwell was about to step out of her tent and into the final 2 minutes of her life. Colleen was a 51-year-old seasonal craft vendor who spent her summers traveling Alaska's highway system, selling handmade jewelry and leather goods at roadside pullouts and informal markets. She had been coming to this particular campground for 7 years, drawn by its proximity to tourist traffic and its lack of fees or regulations. Her reputation among the other regulars was mixed at best. She was known as territorial, quick to anger, and dismissive of anyone who questioned her methods. She had been cited twice by authorities for improper food storage, both times paying the fine and continuing her habits unchanged. Friends from the craft circuit described her as stubborn and independent to a fault, someone who saw rules as suggestions meant for tourists and city people, not for Alaskans like herself who understood the land. Her setup that summer was typical: a canvas wall tent, folding tables for her merchandise, and an aging pickup truck she used for both transport and storage. She supplemented her income by fishing the nearby Susitna River tributaries, keeping what she caught in coolers that she rarely bothered to secure properly. Her goal for the holiday weekend was simple: sell enough jewelry to cover her August expenses and catch enough grayling to fill her freezer. The campground was busy with 4th of July travelers, families with children spread across a dozen informal sites along the tree line, and several long-term campers who knew Colleen by reputation. At least 3 people had approached her on July 2nd suggesting she secure her food better, and she had told each of them, in increasingly hostile terms, to mind their own business. Brown bears in interior Alaska can weigh between 400 and 800 pounds, with males often exceeding 600 pounds by midsummer when salmon runs, and berry crops have allowed them to bulk up. They are opportunistic omnivores with an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting food sources from miles away. And once a bear becomes food conditioned, it loses its natural wariness and begins actively seeking out campsites, trash, and unsecured food. Wildlife biologists consider food-conditioned bears among the most dangerous, as they have learned that humans are not threats, but sources of nutrition, and they will defend food aggressively. Multiple campers reported seeing a large brown bear moving through the area on the evening of July 2nd. At least 2 people had mentioned the sighting to Colleen directly that evening when she returned from fishing. She had 3 good-sized grayling, and rather than clean them away from camp or dispose of the remains properly, she had gutted them on a plastic tarp beside her tent and placed the cleaned fish in a styrofoam cooler. Her neighbor, a man named Dale Pritchard, who ran a small guiding service, had approached her around 10 p.m. and told her she was asking for trouble. Colleen responded with open hostility, telling him to mind his own business and accusing him of trying to boss her around, ending the exchange by cursing at him. The bear returned sometime between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Several campers later reported hearing noises, something heavy moving through brush, the distinctive sound of plastic being torn. Dale woke to the sound of the cooler lid being flipped open and looked out to see the bear's silhouette clearly outlined in the brightening dawn, its massive head buried in Colleen's food storage. He reached for his bear spray and radio, but hesitated as the bear and Colleen's tent were nearly aligned in his line of fire, and before he could reposition, movement caught his eye. Colleen had emerged from her tent. She was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, no shoes. According to multiple witness statements given to wildlife troopers, she immediately began shouting at the bear, her voice loud and aggressive. The bear raised its head from the cooler. Fish remains visible in its jaws. Instead of retreating into her tent or backing away slowly, Colleen grabbed a camp chair and began advancing toward the bear, raising the chair above her head and continuing to yell. Dale Pritchard called out a warning from his tent, but Colleen ignored him. The bear dropped the fish and took 2 steps toward her, its head lowering slightly, a sign of aggression that Colleen either didn't recognize or didn't respect. She was now less than 20 feet from an animal that outweighed her by at least 500 pounds. The charge happened in less than 3 seconds. The bear closed the distance with shocking speed, its body moving with the mechanical efficiency of a predator that had decided Colleen was a threat to its food source. It hit her with its right front paw in a sweeping motion that connected with her upper chest and shoulder, the impact audible to witnesses as a distinct thud followed immediately by the crack of breaking bone. Colleen's sternum fractured on impact, ribs collapsing inward, and she was lifted off her feet and thrown backward nearly 6 feet, landing hard on her back. The bear was on her before she could move. It reared up briefly, then dropped its full weight onto her torso, pinning her to the ground. The crushing force collapsed her chest cavity further, her ribs puncturing her left lung. Her screams woke several nearby campsites within roughly 100 yards. The bear's jaws closed around her head, just above the left ear, its canines punching through the temporal bone and into her brain. For nearly 2 minutes after her screaming stopped, the bear continued its attack, biting repeatedly at her chest and neck. Her body had gone limp within 30 seconds of the throat bite, blood pooling rapidly beneath her, but the bear kept mauling the body with mechanical persistence. It bit through her upper chest, ribs cracking audibly with each compression. Dale radioed wildlife troopers, giving their GPS coordinates and describing an active bear mauling. The nearest ranger station was in Cantwell, approximately 32 miles away by road. After brutal minutes, the bear had stopped biting and was standing over Colleen's body, breathing heavily, blood covering its muzzle and chest. It picked up the remains of a fish from the cooler and walked slowly back into the tree line, disappearing into dense brush. Rangers arrived 38 minutes after the initial call. They found Colleen dead, her body lying in a pool of blood approximately 15 feet from her tent. The preliminary assessment documented massive trauma to the head, throat, and chest. The skull showed multiple crush fractures and puncture wounds consistent with bear dentition. Her throat had been largely torn away, exposing the cervical spine. Ribs on both sides of her chest were broken, with several protruding through the skin. The attending medical examiner later determined cause of death to be massive head trauma and exsanguination secondary to carotid artery rupture. Wildlife officers tracked the bear through the morning, following disturbed vegetation, blood sign, and fresh scat, and it was located approximately 2 miles from the campground and euthanized by rifle. Necropsy revealed it was a 12-year-old male weighing 640 pounds, with significant human food waste in its digestive system. The campground was closed temporarily, and signs were posted warning of bear activity. Colleen's family declined media interviews. Her truck and merchandise were removed by her brother 2 weeks later. It was June 17th, 2018, and the afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the forested trail at Yellowstone National Park. Within the hour, the ground beneath that trail would be stained with blood, and Maribel Hoxie would become another statistic in a preventable tragedy. Maribel was a 41-year-old administrative assistant from Reno, Nevada, known among her co-workers at the insurance firm for two things: her combative personality and her recent obsession with social media photography. She had never been to Yellowstone before this trip, but for months, friends said that she had been planning what she called her wildlife photography expedition. She had printed maps, bookmarked animal behavior guides, and even bought a new telephoto lens, obsessively commenting online about capturing Yellowstone in its rawest, wildest form. Her excitement was matched only by her impatience for authority, a trait friends had long found frustrating. That morning, Maribel had already clashed with park staff at the visitor center over the park's guidance, requiring visitors to remain at least 100 yards away from bears. She had called it ridiculous and accused rangers of fear-mongering to justify their jobs. Her traveling companion, a co-worker named Lynn, later told investigators that Maribel spent the drive to the trailhead complaining about government overreach and insisting that bears could sense human intentions. Lynn, an otherwise cautious and rule-abiding person, recalled feeling a creeping dread as Maribel laughed off every caution, snapping photos of road signs and writing sarcastic captions on her phone. The trail they approached that afternoon wound through a section of dense forest adjacent to a fast-moving river, the kind of terrain grizzlies favored for fishing and foraging. The air carried the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. The sound of rushing water masked other noises, a fact well documented in wildlife studies as increasing the risk of surprise encounters. But Maribel barely noticed, focused entirely on capturing perfect angles and lighting. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with males weighing up to 800 pounds and females typically reaching 400 pounds. They can sprint at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour over short distances, and their 4-inch claws are designed for digging, climbing, and tearing. Despite their size, they can pivot on steep slopes and uneven terrain with surprising agility, a fact well documented in wildlife studies, but one Maribel dismissed as exaggeration. The trail ahead was blocked with yellow rope and multiple warning signs. 2 rangers stood positioned at the closure, addressing a small group of tourists and explaining that a large adult bear had been repeatedly seen defending its favored feeding and bedding area in the immediate vicinity. Witnesses later reported that Maribel arrived during this briefing and immediately began talking loudly, interrupting the ranger to call the warnings fear tactics designed to control tourists. As the ranger continued speaking, movement appeared through the pine trees near the riverbank. The bear emerged, a massive brown form moving with deliberate awareness of the humans, scanning its surroundings and asserting control over its territory. Most of the tourists complied immediately to what they believed was a safe distance. Maribel did the opposite. She loudly declared the warnings exaggerated and ducked under the rope barrier, walking directly toward the bear with her phone raised. The ranger shouted for her to stop. Maribel continued forward, her attention fixed on her phone screen as she framed the shot. The rangers, positioned behind the rope and surrounded by tourists, were limited by park protocol and safety constraints. The bear was already within critical distance, and deploying spray risked escalating the situation amid fleeing tourists. The bear covered the distance in a few seconds. The charge happened with shocking speed, its massive body accelerating with explosive power, refined by evolution. Maribel had just begun to lower her phone when the bear hit her. The impact was like a car collision. The bear's massive paw swung in a devastating arc, striking Maribel's upper body with enough force to lift her off her feet before driving her backward onto the rocky ground. The bear was on her instantly, its weight, approximately 400 pounds, pinning her flat. What followed was brutal. The bear's jaws closed around Maribel's head and neck. Blood spilled rapidly across the dirt and rocks as teeth punctured major blood vessels in Maribel's neck. Her arms flailed briefly, hands striking uselessly against the bear's massive shoulder. Maribel's movements had ceased by this point, though whether from shock, blood loss, or catastrophic injury was impossible to determine from observation alone. The bear delivered 2 more bites to Maribel's upper body, focused on neutralizing the threat before suddenly disengaging. The entire attack had lasted just under a minute. The bear lingered briefly to ensure the intruder had left its territory before retreating into the trees. The ranger radioed for emergency response within seconds of the bear's retreat. Park medics, already staged within the park due to the wildlife closure, arrived immediately. The attending medic noted massive blood loss, obvious catastrophic cranial trauma, and severe trauma to the neck and upper torso. Death was pronounced at the scene. The trail remained closed for more than 48 hours, while wildlife officials monitored bear movement in the area. The bear was tracked but not removed or euthanized, as officials determined the attack was a defensive territorial response rather than predatory behavior. It was October 17, 2014, and the turquoise water off the western shore of New Providence Island shimmered under a cloudless Caribbean sky. The dive boat had anchored a few miles offshore, where the sandy bottom dropped away into deeper blue, and the water column teemed with reef fish, sea turtles, and the sleek gray shapes that had made this site famous. Cynthia Reynolds was a 39-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative from Atlanta who had built her career on aggressive persistence and her personal life on the assumption that her judgment was superior to most. She had arrived in the Bahamas for a week of diving, specifically seeking out operators who offered shark encounters. Her dive certification was basic, an open water card earned 5 years earlier, but she had informed the boat crew that she was essentially an expert, having completed over 20 dives in various locations. The crew noted that she had questioned their equipment choices, criticized the boat's departure time, and loudly complained about the presence of novice divers in her group. The dive operator specialized in controlled shark feeding experiences, a controversial but legal practice in Bahamian waters. The dive master, a Bahamian woman named Keisha, explained that bull sharks would be attracted to the site using bait contained in a secured metal crate. Divers would remain in a designated observation area, marked by weighted ropes a short distance from the feeding zone. Under no circumstances were divers to approach the bait crate, touch the sharks, or leave the observation area. Keisha emphasized that bull sharks are highly competitive during feeding and capable of sudden, forceful bites, and that divers must never leave the observation area or touch the bait. Cynthia interrupted several times during the briefing, asking why divers couldn't get closer for better photographs and suggesting that the safety perimeter was excessive. The dive proceeded normally at first. A cluster of bull sharks, ranging from 7 to 11 feet in length and weighing between 200 and 500 pounds, circled the bait crate as divers watched from the observation line. Cynthia had positioned herself at the edge of the group, her camera housing extended toward the sharks, frequently drifting forward until Keisha signaled her back. As the feeding reached its peak, with sharks darting through clouds of dispersed bait and fish fragments, Cynthia pushed off the bottom and swam directly toward the crate, leaving the observation area entirely. Bull sharks are among the most aggressive shark species, highly competitive in feeding situations and capable of biting with extraordinary force. During feeding events, they enter a state of heightened arousal, reacting reflexively to blood, vibrations, and erratic movements. Their serrated teeth are designed to cut through flesh and bone efficiently. Cynthia had reached the bait crate and was attempting to photograph a shark feeding directly from the metal mesh when a large female bull shark turned sharply and collided with her extended arm. The shark's jaws closed around Cynthia's right forearm just below the elbow. The serrated teeth cut deeply into tissue before the shark released almost immediately. A powerful, reflexive bite, typical during feeding events. Cynthia recoiled violently, tearing her arm free and creating severe lacerations that began bleeding heavily into the water. The sudden burst of movement and blood altered the behavior of the nearby sharks. Several turned in her direction, circling tightly. One brushed against her injured arm, its rough skin scraping the wound as it passed. As Cynthia attempted to regain control of her buoyancy, her regulator slipped partially from her mouth. She inhaled seawater and began to panic, kicking erratically. A smaller bull shark made a quick, forceful pass and delivered a single bite to her right thigh before veering away. It did not hold on. After that second strike, the sharks resumed circling behavior rather than continuing repeated attacks. Keisha and another dive master were already moving toward her, using metal poles and hard camera housings to redirect approaching sharks and create space. They reached Cynthia within seconds, forming a defensive barrier and pulling her away from the feeding zone. The sharks followed briefly, but did not continue striking once she was removed from the active bait area. By the time they pulled Cynthia clear of the immediate danger, she had sustained severe bite wounds to her right forearm and right thigh. The crew initiated emergency ascent procedures and administered oxygen once on the surface while applying direct pressure to her wounds. A marine emergency helicopter was dispatched from Nassau and arrived within 30 minutes. Cynthia was barely conscious and had inhaled significant seawater during the chaos. Her right thigh injury had caused extensive blood loss, and despite aggressive efforts to control the bleeding, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Cynthia was airlifted to a hospital but died during transport. Officials later determined the cause of death to be hemorrhagic shock due to severe vascular injury to the right thigh, with drowning listed as a contributing factor. The dive operator's license was temporarily suspended pending investigation, though final findings concluded that Cynthia had deliberately violated safety protocols by leaving the observation area and approaching the active feeding zone. No action was taken against the business beyond a requirement for enhanced briefing documentation. It was September 11, 2016, in the Komodo National Park's Lo Liang sector, where the ancient predators that ruled these volcanic islands. The morning air shimmered with heat as tour groups gathered near the ranger station, unaware that within hours, the pristine wilderness would be stained with blood and the screams of a woman who believed rules were merely suggestions. Maribel Quayle was a 44-year-old purchasing coordinator from Perth, known among her colleagues for her stubborn independence and casual disregard for authority. She had booked a park-authorized but bare-bones group trek, drawn by photos of the famous Komodo dragons, and determined to prove that expensive guided experiences were unnecessary for seasoned travelers. Her colleagues said Maribel prided herself on being practical and no-nonsense, dismissing what she called tourist theater, designed to extract extra fees from gullible visitors. Her travel stories, retold by friends and colleagues, documented a pattern of ignoring local warnings and guides, from swimming in restricted areas in Bali to hiking alone in remote parts of Thailand. This trip to Komodo was meant to be the crown jewel of her Southeast Asian adventure, and she had specifically chosen the lowest-cost tour tier permitted by the park, confident that her instincts would keep her safe where others needed supervision. Maribel arrived wearing bright red flip-flops and a dismissive attitude toward the mandatory safety briefing, standing at the back of the group and intermittently checking her phone, as rangers explained the dangers of the world's largest lizard species. Komodo dragons are not cooperative hunters, but multiple individuals are often independently drawn to the same bleeding prey. Komodo dragons are apex predators that can reach 9 to 10 feet in length and exceed 150 pounds, equipped with serrated teeth and venom glands that release anticoagulant compounds, compounding hemorrhage over minutes. While bacterial infection is no longer considered the primary killing mechanism, it remains a serious secondary risk. During the mandatory briefing, the head ranger had been explicit. Remain within approximately 15 to 20 feet of the guide at all times, never sit or crouch, and never leave the marked trail. He warned the group that an adult dragon had been observed moving through the area earlier that morning, increasing the likelihood of close encounters. Maribel scoffed when told her footwear was inappropriate, insisting she had worn flip-flops across Asia without incident. When Kadek warned that open wounds, bright colors, and strong scents could elevate risk, Maribel laughed audibly, dismissing the guidance. 20 minutes into the trek, as temperatures climbed past 95 degrees Fahrenheit, Maribel began lagging behind, complaining about the heat and the guide's pace. When the group paused to observe a dragon resting near a watering hole, Maribel noticed a shaded rocky outcrop about 50 yards away and announced she was going to sit there. The ranger ordered her to return immediately, but she waved him off and continued walking. She sat down, removed her flip-flops, and applied sunscreen. What Maribel didn't realize was that an adult Komodo dragon had been moving intermittently through this corridor since early morning, following residual scent trails from recent prey activity. The reptile emerged silently from a low scrub behind her. When Maribel noticed it, she attempted to shoo it away with her flip-flop, a gesture that registered as erratic movement. The dragon struck from a shallow shelf just below the retaining terrain, clamping onto her left foot. The serrated teeth sank into her skin as Maribel screamed. Venom-induced anticoagulation compounded the hemorrhage, causing her movements to slow within minutes. She fell backward as the dragon released and rebit before withdrawing briefly. Blood pooled beneath her as shock began to set in. As Maribel attempted to crawl, the blood scent attracted a second dragon, which arrived independently and struck in short, violent bursts. The attacks were brief, with the animals retreating between bites. Rangers eventually located her, positioned at a distance, used standard deterrence tools including forked control poles and shouted commands, protocols designed to redirect dragons without provoking escalation. They radioed for emergency response immediately, but limited visibility of the uneven volcanic terrain delayed access. Backup personnel reached the site approximately 35 minutes after the initial attack, by which time Maribel had no detectable pulse. She was transported by boat to Labuan Bajo, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination following traumatic bite injuries with venom-induced anticoagulation. Maribel's funeral was held quietly in Perth a week later, attended by close family and a few colleagues who described her as adventurous but headstrong. The incident received brief local coverage, with park officials reiterating that the victim's decision to leave the group directly violated safety protocol. Tours resumed weeks later without structural changes. It was August 23, 2014, and the humid air hung heavy over the Adelaide River floodplain, about an hour outside Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. The water moved slowly, brown and opaque, lined with paper barks and pandanus palms that concealed the banks from easy view. Patricia Newland was a 44-year-old middle school vice principal from Melbourne who had built her professional reputation on enforcing rules for others while finding exceptions for herself. Colleagues described her as someone who demanded strict compliance from students and staff, but regularly bypassed protocols she found personally inconvenient. She had been written up twice by her superintendent for overstepping administrative boundaries, both times responding with grievances that dragged on for months. Her vacation to the top end was meant to be a wildlife photography expedition, a hobby she approached with aggressive certainty. She had booked a river cruise advertised as a crocodile viewing experience, joining a group of 11 other tourists on an aluminum vessel designed for safe observation. The boat was equipped with high rails and shaded seating, specifically configured to keep passengers away from the water's edge. The tour operator, a weathered local named Mick, delivered the mandatory safety briefing before departure, explaining that the Adelaide River system contained one of the highest concentrations of saltwater crocodiles in the world. He emphasized that passengers must remain seated and must never place hands or any body part near the water. Patricia challenged him immediately, questioning whether the warnings were legally required or simply theatrical. When Mick explained that multiple fatalities had occurred in territory waters, she dismissed the information as exaggerated local folklore. 20 minutes into the cruise, the boat stopped near a muddy bank where a large saltwater crocodile basked in the afternoon sun. Passengers photographed from their seats while Mick provided information about crocodile biology. Patricia complained that the angle was poor and the distance too great. She stood and moved to the stern, leaning over the low rail to get a shot without other passengers in her frame. Mick ordered her to sit down. She ignored him. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles, with males commonly exceeding 16 feet and occasionally reaching over 20 feet in length. Large males can weigh well over 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of remaining motionless for hours while monitoring prey movement. Their bite is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, strong enough to crush bone instantly, and their hunting strategy typically involves explosive acceleration from the water, clamping onto prey. Once a crocodile secures a grip, escape is nearly impossible. The crocodile on the bank had slipped into the water moments after the boat stopped, its movement so subtle that only Mick noticed. He began maneuvering the vessel away from the bank, but Patricia remained at the stern, bracing one hand on the rail and extending her camera toward the water's surface. Mick shouted at her a final time. The crocodile struck from directly beneath the stern. The water erupted as the animal launched vertically, its jaws closing around Patricia's right forearm and wrist with crushing force. The impact fractured her forearm immediately, bones splintering under pressure as the animal yanked her toward the water. Patricia's scream was cut short as the crocodile's weight pulled her over the rail and into the water head first. She disappeared beneath the surface almost immediately. The water churned violently as the crocodile initiated its death roll, spinning through the murky water amid clouds of blood and sediment. The rolling continued for several seconds, the crocodile's jaws maintaining their crushing grip on her arm as the violent rotation disoriented her and prevented any attempt to surface. The death roll caused catastrophic damage to her shoulder and upper arm, tearing muscle and ligament while driving her deeper underwater. Her body surfaced briefly, face down and motionless, before being dragged under again as the crocodile repositioned its grip and pulled her toward deeper water. Mick radioed emergency services immediately, providing GPS coordinates and a description of the attack. Rangers already conducting aerial patrols were diverted to the site, but there was nothing to recover. A search operation continued for 3 days. Patricia's remains were located 4 days after the attack, cached beneath a submerged log system downstream. Officials later said she drowned, with massive blood loss from the injuries. The tour operator was cleared of any liability, with investigators noting that Patricia had received multiple direct warnings and had deliberately violated explicit safety instructions. It was November 9, 2017, and the morning sun had barely cleared the rocky outcrops of Ranthambore National Park when Nalini Devkar's voice cut through the stillness of Zone 3, sharp and demanding, unaware that a large male tiger was already watching from cover. Nalini Devkar was a 52-year-old retired textile buyer from Pune, Maharashtra, who had built her career on intimidation and precision. Her former colleagues described her as brilliant at negotiations, but exhausting to work with, someone who berated subordinates over minor errors and treated service staff with open contempt. Her reputation for being relentless in arguments extended into her personal life. Family members recalled her insisting on controlling every detail, from meal choices to vacation itineraries. This was her second wildlife safari in 6 months, the first having disappointed her with what she described in online reviews as inadequate tiger sightings and incompetent guides. That morning, she had arrived at the safari assembly point 15 minutes late, berating her hotel driver for not driving fast enough. Her assigned safari guide, Rajesh Kumar, had worked in Ranthambore for 11 years and said that he recognized the type immediately, the guest who would complain regardless of what nature provided. During the mandatory safety briefing, Nalini had interrupted twice to ask when they would see tigers, visibly impatient, as Rajesh explained that guests must remain seated at all times, and that standing for extended periods or exiting the vehicle was strictly prohibited under Indian wildlife protection laws. Bengal tigers are among the largest predators on Earth, with males weighing between 400 and 520 pounds and measuring up to 9.5 feet in length. Their canine teeth extend over 3 inches, designed to secure the throat or crush the cervical spine of prey, delivering rapid death. Unlike lions that hunt in coordinated groups, tigers are solitary ambush predators, capable of exploding from cover at speeds reaching up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Their padded paws allow them to move almost silently through dense undergrowth, while powerful forelimbs enable them to pull down prey several times their own weight. A tiger's night vision is estimated to be up to 6 times better than a human's, giving it a decisive advantage during dawn and dusk when most attacks occur. They are patient hunters, masters of stealth and camouflage, capable of remaining motionless for hours before the tiniest movement triggers explosive pursuit. The morning safari had proceeded without incident for the first hour. 3 other jeeps were dispersed throughout Zone 3, all maintaining radio contact as they searched for signs of tiger activity. At approximately 8:20 a.m., Rajesh spotted fresh pug marks in the dirt track and slowed the vehicle, signaling to the other drivers. Within minutes, one of the other guides radioed that he had detected movement in a patch of dried grass roughly 50 feet from the trail. Rajesh maneuvered Nalini's jeep to a position offering a clear sightline while maintaining what he judged to be a safe distance. The other tourists in the jeep, a German couple and their adult son, later reported that the moment Rajesh stopped, Nalini began complaining loudly that he had chosen a poor angle. She stood up in her seat despite Rajesh's immediate verbal warning to sit down. Rajesh turned fully around in the driver's seat, speaking firmly that park regulations required all guests to remain seated. Nalini ignored him entirely, raising her camera and declaring that she hadn't paid for a safari to take pictures from a bad angle. Nalini climbed over the side of the jeep onto the ground. Rajesh started to rise from his seat, but she had already moved 3 steps from the vehicle. The tiger, a fully grown male, had been concealed in grass less than 45 feet away. One moment there was only grass. The next, a massive striped shape was airborne. T-72 covered the distance in approximately 2 seconds, moving with such explosive speed that Nalini never turned to face him. The impact of a roughly 450-pound tiger striking at full speed knocked her forward onto her face. The tiger seized her, and within moments his jaws had closed around the back of her head and neck. Nalini's body jerked briefly, then went limp. The tiger maintained its grip for several seconds, holding her motionless. Then, with Nalini's body still clamped in its jaws, her arms scraped along the ground, leaving parallel grooves in the dirt. Within 10 seconds, the tiger had pulled Nalini's body into denser cover and vanished from sight. Rajesh immediately radioed park control, while the driver of the second jeep, positioned about 75 feet away and carrying 4 Indian tourists, made a parallel emergency call. Park protocol required that all vehicles remain stationary and that no one attempt to approach. Forest officials and a veterinary team arrived 12 minutes later in a specially equipped response vehicle. They located Nalini's body a short distance from the attack site, partially concealed beneath a fallen tree. A senior forest official confirmed death at the scene from catastrophic neck trauma and associated injuries consistent with a large predator bite, indicating death had occurred almost immediately. Ranthambhore's administration conducted a formal inquiry and ruled the incident as human error, resulting from willful violation of safety regulations. The animal was subsequently monitored through routine tracking protocols, but no punitive action was taken against it, as authorities determined there was no evidence of abnormal or aggressive behavior beyond a typical response to close human presence. Nalini's remains were returned to her family in Pune after standard procedural examinations were completed. The transfer was handled quietly and without public announcement, in accordance with the family's wishes. A small funeral was later held in a private setting, attended only by close relatives and friends, with no media coverage requested or permitted. It was July 10, 2017, and the morning mist still clung to the shoreline of Lake Victoria, near Kisumu, Kenya, where the water met tall papyrus reeds in a maze of channels and mudflats. The lake stretched to the horizon, deceptively calm, its surface broken occasionally by the rounded backs of hippopotamuses, moving between deeper water and the shallows. Sharon Whitfield was a 45-year-old real estate agent from Phoenix, Arizona, who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of getting what she wanted through sheer persistence and volume. Her adult children had declined to join her on this trip, citing previous travel experiences that had devolved into public arguments with hotel staff and tour guides. One of her daughters later told investigators that Sharon had a pattern of ignoring rules she considered inconvenient, believing her experience and judgment outweighed any posted warning. Sharon had described the trip to friends as a bucket list adventure, though she had done minimal research and arrived with expectations shaped primarily by documentary footage and resort brochures. The lakeside camp where she was staying had clear protocols regarding wildlife interaction. A printed notice in each tent warned guests that hippos regularly moved through the camp at night, and that guests should never approach the water's edge alone. The camp manager, a Kenyan woman named Grace, personally briefed Sharon on the first evening, explaining that hippos are responsible for more human fatalities across Africa than nearly any other large animal and are notoriously territorial. Sharon listened with visible impatience, interrupting twice to ask when breakfast would be served. On her second morning, Sharon woke before dawn and decided to photograph the sunrise over the lake. She ignored the protocol requiring guests to request an escort and walked alone toward the shoreline. When a groundskeeper spotted her and called out a warning, she waved dismissively and continued walking. Sharon had waited approximately 15 feet from shore when the water in front of her suddenly bulged upward. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for an estimated 500 human deaths annually. Despite their rotund appearance, they are remarkably fast and agile, capable of running at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour on land and moving through water with powerful efficiency. Adult males can weigh over 4,000 pounds, and their jaws can open to nearly 180 degrees, revealing canine teeth that can exceed 12 inches in length. A massive bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, water cascading off its barrel-shaped body as it surged toward her. Its mouth opened wide, the pink interior and long ivory tusks clearly visible. Sharon stumbled backward but lost her footing in the soft mud, falling into the shallows. The hippo lunged and clamped its jaws around her torso in a sudden crushing bite. The force knocked the air from her lungs instantly. The animal released almost immediately. Witnesses later reported the hippo jerking its head upward, lifting Sharon partially from the water before dropping her. In its retreat, the animal surged forward and stepped over her, its massive weight driving her deeper into the mud. By the time the hippo finally retreated into deeper water, Sharon had sustained extensive puncture wounds, blunt force trauma to the chest, and massive internal hemorrhage. It was October 3rd, 2014, and the moonless night around Lake Naivasha would witness the brutal consequences of human arrogance, as Maurice Otieno learned too late that hippos kill more people in Africa than any other large mammal, their massive jaws designed to crush boats and bones with equal efficiency. Maris was a 52-year-old operations manager at one of Lake Naivasha's largest flower farms, a position she had held for 8 years through a combination of aggressive management and cost-cutting measures that impressed foreign investors. Known among workers for her impatience with what she considered excuses, Maris had built her reputation on solving problems through direct action rather than accommodation. Her workers described her as someone who viewed wildlife as obstacles to productivity, frequently complaining about the hippos that crossed farm property nightly on their way between grazing areas and the lake. The flower export business was highly competitive, and her workers said she prided herself on maintaining schedules that other farms couldn't match. Recent hippo activity had damaged irrigation lines and trampled flower beds, costing the farm thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Maris had grown increasingly frustrated with what she saw as the workers' passive acceptance of the situation. When the farm's wildlife service liaison suggested installing barriers and lighting to redirect the hippo's path, Maris dismissed the recommendation as expensive and unnecessary. Instead, she had ordered workers to use emergency flares and noisemakers to drive the animals away from the farm's main pathways. She wanted to establish human dominance over the hippos and force them to find alternative routes that wouldn't impact production. Lake Naivasha's shoreline was dotted with papyrus reeds and acacia trees, creating a maze of paths that hippos had used for generations to move between water and grazing areas. Hippos are among Africa's most dangerous animals, with adult bulls weighing up to 8,000 pounds and possessing jaws that can open to 150 degrees, revealing canine teeth up to 20 inches long. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of snapping a canoe in half or crushing human bones to powder. Farm workers had repeatedly warned Maris that harassing hippos was dangerous, explaining that the animals became increasingly aggressive when their established paths were disrupted. The night security guard, a local man named Joseph Kamau, had specifically told her that recent flare harassment had made the hippos more unpredictable and territorial. Earlier that week, workers had reported seeing a large bull hippo lingering near the farm's main pathway instead of returning directly to the lake after grazing. Fresh dung and deep hoof prints in the mud indicated the animal was spending more time in the area, a behavioral change that experienced locals recognized as a warning sign. On the night of October 3rd, Maris decided to personally oversee the harassment operation, bringing 3 workers and Kamau to the main pathway where hippos typically crossed around midnight. She carried a powerful flashlight and 2 emergency flares, instructing the team to spread out along a 200-foot section of the path. Against Kamau's advice, Maris positioned herself at the front of the group, approximately 50 feet ahead of the others. When the familiar sound of hippos moving through the reeds became audible around 11:45 p.m., she immediately lit a flare and began advancing toward the noise, waving the bright flame and shouting to drive the animals away. The workers behind her watched as Maris's flashlight beams swept back and forth through the tall grass beside the path. For several minutes, the hippos seemed to retreat toward the lake, their heavy breathing and splashing growing more distant. Kamau called for Maris to return to the group, but she continued forward, determined to ensure the hippos had completely abandoned the area. Suddenly, the workers saw Maris's flashlight suddenly stop moving. In the silence that followed, they heard a deep, explosive exhale, the warning sound hippos make before attacking. Before anyone could react, a massive bull hippo charged from the tall grass at close range, its enormous bulk moving with shocking speed, despite weighing between 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. The attack was swift and devastating. Two workers witnessed the hippo strike Maris down with its massive head. She fell backward onto the muddy path as the bull reared up, its cavernous mouth opening. In a single crushing bite, the hippo clamped its jaws across Maris's waist. The hippo's bite force catastrophically crushed her pelvis and lower spine, causing her lower body to go completely limp, while her torso remained trapped in the animal's massive jaws, Maris's body becoming increasingly mangled with each violent movement. Within moments, the hippo neutralized the perceived threat, delivering additional crushing bites to her torso and abdomen. The witnesses watched in frozen horror as Maris's body was thrown aside, her clothing torn and soaked with blood, the bull snorting loudly as it asserted control over the pathway. The entire attack lasted in under a minute. After disabling and killing the intruder, the hippo retreated toward the lake, leaving behind a severely mutilated body and a spreading pool of blood on the muddy path. Kamau began running toward the farm buildings to call for help. Farm security contacted emergency services immediately, but responders didn't arrive for nearly 30 minutes due to the remote location and poor road conditions. By then, there was little to recover, except extensive traumatic injuries and scattered personal effects. The coroner's report noted massive trauma to the torso and abdomen, with the cause of death listed as exsanguination and crushing injuries consistent with a hippo attack. The incident was ruled a case of wildlife provocation, with authorities noting that harassment of hippos violated wildlife service guidelines. The flower farm installed barriers and lighting along hippo pathways and implemented strict policies prohibiting worker interaction with wildlife.